Welcome to the Jedi Group podcast. Jedi, it's not a mind trick. It's justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment because you know we want to hear from you. And now, let's get into the show. Welcome to the Jedi Group. All right. Okay, so let me fix this problem. Welcome. Welcome. Yeah, so we've got a little bit of yeah, there we go. That should have resolved it. Good deal. Okay, so ladies, welcome to the show. Um, of course, I am the only Mel Cruz. You know what, you guys who've been here before, typically my intro, I use a different intro, and typically my intros are smoother than this. But listen, I am in the company of some super intelligent Black women, and I'm over the moon with it. I can't wait to get into this discussion. So please hit the like button, share the show, leave a comment if you're so inclined. We want to hear from you. You're welcome in the Twitter spaces to come up if you like. Um, but I do want to get right to it. We're talking about pet to threat phenomenon, the pet to threat phenomenon. And when I looked at the literature, of course, it says, the researchers, but these researchers are actually doctors. So we're going to get some clarification on their role and how they came to come up with this. It's just so fascinating. So I'm not going to do a bunch of talking. I'm going to let these ladies get it in, and we'll just go from there. So I do want to welcome Dr. Juanita Johnson Bailey. Hi, Dr. Bailey. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Dr. Keisha Thomas. Hello, ma'am.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening. And then, of course, Rosemary Phelps, Dr. Rosemary Phelps as well. Hello, Dr. Phelps.
Good evening.
Good evening. Okay, ladies. So we've done all the niceties. I really want to get into it. So when I was researching, I don't know how I came across this phenomenon, but it came across right on time. And so I guess what we could do first before we jump all the way in is have each of you, if you don't mind, take 30 seconds or less, kind of give us a quick overview of who you are, your specialty, and what you'd like for the audience to know about you and your work. I guess we can start with you, Dr. Bailey.
Hi, I'm Juanita Johnson Bailey. I'm a professor at the University of Georgia. I hold the professorship, the Centennial Professorship in Women's Studies. And I've been at Georgia 30 years, and I have been blessed since I've been at the University of Georgia to meet Dr. Rosemary Phelps and Dr. Keisha Thomas. We're in totally different departments, we were in different parts of the university, but the university brought us together, and it was, I think, one of the best things that happened to me at the University of Georgia.
Awesome, awesome. Dr. Thomas?
Oh, that was so sweet, Juanita.
Yeah.
I'm Keisha Thomas. I'm an industrial and organizational psychologist, and my research focuses on workplace diversity. I'm professor emeritus at the University of Georgia, and as Juanita mentioned, that's where we all met. And I left in 2020 to take a position as Dean of Arts and Sciences at another institution. And I guess what I would want you to know that we pursue this work not only, because of our own positions as Black women navigating this society, but also to make sure that we can improve the workplace climate and environment for everyone.
Awesome, awesomeness. And Dr. Phelps, please.
Yes, I will first of all say it has been a lifeline, along with a pleasure, to work with Dr. Juanita Johnson Bailey as well as Dr. Thomas. I am currently a program coordinator for the counseling psychology doctoral program at the University of Georgia. I have served as department head of my department, which is the of Counseling and Human Development Services at the university. I was the first Black African-American woman to serve in that role. My research focuses on Black professional women and multicultural issues more broadly.
Okay, awesomeness. Wow. Let me shout out the people in the Twitter space. Twitter, if you can hear me, please put an emoji up. I want to make sure that you're getting all of this good richness. So if I can get 100, a thumbs up, something in the air lets me know that you guys can hear. Twitter spaces. All right, good deal. Thank you, DJ. Appreciate you. Okay, so that's interesting. So I want to take it back around here to Dr. Bailey, what you stated about, or Dr. Johnson Bailey, what you stated about how you guys ended up meeting. And you said the universe brought you guys together. And of course, shout out to you, Dr. Nikki Proctor Walden in our YouTube space. Thank you so much for joining. I appreciate you. Thank you for sharing the live. So just if you don't mind, if you're able, like how exactly did it come about? Because what I want to know is, did you start the research and Pet to Threat was already this phenomenon, or had you together as a group, did you guys say, hey, did you stumble across these commonalities? I mean, that's what I want to know first.
Well, to give you a little bit of background, we had all been at the University of Georgia for more than, I think, 2 decades when we were put into or nominated to attend the HERS Academy. And it was the HERS Academy at Wellesley. So our different departments sent us there. We were the 3 professors that were sent to this academic leadership program for women who were going into administration. And so being at Wellesley together over the weeks, we would have conversations after we'd attend classes and seminars and lectures. And so we each looked at the commonalities across our careers, and that's how this conversation started on Pet to Threat. It was Dr. Thomas who actually put sort of the themes that we had put out there together and came up with the phrase, the descriptor Pet to Threat. And it sort of evolved from a natural conversation. In describing our careers, I said when I first came on board, everyone loved me. It sort of reminded me of what Zora Neale Hurston said about the pet Negro. And then Dr. Phelps talked about how now, as she had progressed in her career and gone through the ranks and had positions of power, people didn't see her that way anymore. And I believe it was Dr. Thomas that said, yes, now we're seen as a threat. And so she put those sort of ideas together, and the Pet to Threat descriptor emerged from the research that we had done and looking at other people's careers and looking at our own careers. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Thomas. Let me just tell you that both of them are psychologists. I'm the educator in the bunch, in the group. And so I defer to them when we're talking about research. So
Right.
Dr. Thomas.
HERS, as Dr. Johnson Bailey mentioned, is it stands for Higher Education Resource Services, and it's somewhat of a boot camp for high potential women across the academy. You don't need to be a faculty member. You could be a registrar or director of financial aid. And just, in probably the 6 weeks that we travel back and forth between Athens, Georgia, and Wellesley, Massachusetts, talking to our colleagues from these other institutions, we would hear the more junior women, especially those who were, I would say, severely underrepresented as women or as women of color in their units or departments, talk about, how they often felt patronized, how they were, isolated. I clearly recall one woman in the physics department, saying she was, the first woman in her department. All of her colleagues were older men, and how they would literally say, "Oh, you remind me of my daughter," and kind of almost pat her on the back.
Mhm.
But then when we talked to more senior colleagues, they also were, isolated, somewhat alienated, did not easily get the rewards and recognition that they deserved, and often felt as though they were treated as though they were some type of threat. And so it was really kind of that model that led us to subsequently collect data, through, from colleagues from around the country, to help us kind of fine tune what that really looked like. And, was it just our experience and the people we talked to, or was this something, broader?
Mhm. So the one of the questions I had too, well, multiple questions. So how many years did it take you guys to culminate all of this research? How many years did you spend researching? Was it months? Was it years? And are your results confined to academia only, or do you have any additional evidence, if you will, that shows how it impacts people that are outside of academia? So, like in the workplace, et cetera, et cetera, in the
Well,
civilian.
I will, my graduate students collected the data for us after we developed a survey that got open-ended responses from our participants. And actually, the data collection was very quick. I mean, we had some key listservs that, we sent the survey out to, but we asked people to forward it on to others. And so, as you might imagine, just, as evidenced by your interests, it really took off and it was shared very broadly. So it wasn't an issue collecting, data at all. I would say it was a matter of months, definitely not years.
Mhm.
In regards to it kind of playing outside of the academy, well, that is a workplace.
Yes.
But certainly, once we have done interviews and podcasts, and when you see it mentioned, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, even on TikTok, some younger colleagues have shared it on TikTok, and people across industries will, kind of report back like, yes, this is my experience, or this happened to me, or this is why I left my last workplace. So certainly it's been law, it's been, engineering, technology, it's been medicine, you name it. I think it's a shared experience. And I think it really represents the experiences of individuals who are highly tokenized. And we know that as women of color, we are often one of a kind or first of our kind,
Right.
especially within professional contexts.
Right. And so one of the questions I have is the individuals who are the pet and loving it. Because who doesn't love being the pet? You know what I mean? So these individuals, do they end up like crashing hard, or did you guys find where there were circumstances where, they're pet from day one till day end, till the end of their career? How does that typically play out? And before you guys answer that, I do want to shout out Dr. Nikki, who stated in the comments, this conversation is so important, as my own transition from the classroom to administration has been painful. Um, Thank you for that transparency, Dr. Walden. Thank you for that. I don't know, either of you ladies that want to answer that question, as far and even possibly address what Dr. Nikki has stated. Does the pet, do some of them find where they actually remain the pet, and does the pet does that individual at times feel threatened and then keep this thing going, keep this phenomenon alive? I'm hoping this question, you guys are able to process this question for me.
Well, it really depends on your level of consciousness.
Mm.
Certainly, you know, there everyone likes being the favorite, that nice girl syndrome. We are socialized to want to be nice and to appreciate when people appreciate us. But there's a level of cognizance I think we have as adults where we realize when you're being sort of seen as a pet, you're not being seen as an entire person. You're not being seen as self-actualized. So it really depends on your level of consciousness. I've seen people who are in total denial about the way that they're being tokenized, the way that they are, in a sense, as Dr. Thomas said, being patted on the back and they're there and you're okay. But as you grow and as you mature in the workplace, it gets old. So, Dr. Phelps.
Yes.
Expand on that for me, because I don't think I articulated that too well.
So I would just add that I don't think there is one single way that people are petted, if you will, that I think we all maybe experience that in a different manner. But I do think that the pet part, sure, we all want to feel supported. We want to feel liked. And sometimes I think some people don't even realize they are being a pet. But it's sometimes for me like people have pets and they care about them and they showcase them and they are very, if you will, proud of them. And so treat them in a manner of, we're supporting you, we really like what you're doing. But there's also behind that is, but look what we are doing to support that person. So in some ways, the Black woman doesn't feel as though it's her own, that she's come into her own existence. It's sometimes at the existence or the prompting of others.
Right.
So once people kind of recognize that, I do my own work, I get rewarded for my own work, I give recognition where it is due. And then at some point that turns into a threat to others.
And so, and that's kind of like where I was trying to head with the, for example, you could have a young, brilliant individual who is, the pet of the entire, organization. Everyone loves her and this and or him, or I'll say her to stick with the research. And so they're well loved, they're beloved, and then someone else can come in, and the pet feels threatened. So I know when the pet to threat phenomenon, it's more of the. So I guess what I'm trying to ask you is there ever in this phenomenon where the actual pet feels a threat to their position that impacts this phenomenon, or is that totally out of the picture? Is that question, is Mike, is that question clear? I don't know if I'm articulate, because I see your face, Dr. Thomas, and it's like, wait a minute now, Mel, wait a minute.
No, I do think there is an aspect of the pet experience that, like both Dr. Phelps and Johnson Bailey mentioned, there's this excitement about this individual onboarding and the potential that they might offer this work group. And again, I think especially if that person is severely underrepresented, so perhaps they're the first person of color,
right?
And this person's going to change the optics of the group. And so for the incumbents, it's like, oh, look at us. We're diverse. We're inclusive. We are, cutting edge or whatever. And so a lot of that excitement and enthusiasm is really misdirected. And so, sure, it feels great at the beginning, and you might actually be overexposed, but you can also be underutilized when it comes to the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you thought you were being hired for, and you probably were hired for. But now, there is a difference between the formal contract, what I'm hired to do, and then the psychological contract, what people think I am there for.
Mm.
And that certainly, I think, is threatening. And so for people who find themselves in pet roles where, perhaps they're not being stretched, or they're not being challenged in their role, or they're not growing in authority, that can start to feel exploitative. And when they don't see a true growth opportunity, they're going to start to engage in turnover behaviors and job withdrawal. And they're going to start to question, is this the right path for me? And I think, outside of both the academic and non-academic workplaces, we see people moving on to different industries or becoming entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I read that in the article, and one of the articles that you had written, Dr. Thomas, and that was that was puzzling, because you look at Black women out here trying to go that route, even if they've never experienced pet to threat, just become an entrepreneur, and so they can walk in their own and do their own thing. And then you've got the pushback and the hindrance of being able to get seed money and grant money and startup capital and things of that nature. So where it's like you got to have a door being slammed in your face in one direction, and then you're on your job, and it appears as though the door is closing in on you, because now your ability to be your full self at work is really taken away from you, because because of this you now turn from the pet to the threat. Do employers know that they are operating in this pet to threat dynamic? Do they know this? Are they doing this intentionally, or what are your findings on that?
So I think it's an interesting question. Certainly, I think there will be some who are intentional about it. I think a lot of it is done in the daily maintenance of how people operate, in terms of the policies, the procedures, the norms, if you will, that are part of organizations. So I think some of it certainly could be not necessarily intentional, but please hear me say that I do think there is intentionality at times, but just your standard operating procedures in terms of how people operate.
Sure. So, so it's not like they come through and say, "Hey, let's execute this pet to threat on them." It's just they just merely, this is just how they operate anyway.
And I think can be certainly a reaction to coming face to face with brilliant Black women who stand their ground, who want and demand inclusivity and have a social justice lens. I think in some ways it's a reaction to that as well.
Mm-hmm. Just a quick minute, shout out to Island Browning. Island Browning, good to see you. Thanks for pulling up. So what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? Again, I believe a different article I read said, start looking for another job. But what if you've got time in? What if you don't want another job? What if you want to fight it out? I mean, how do we deal with these things? What did you guys find to be the successful way to navigate in a pet to threat environment?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to always know the culture that you're existing in.
Mhm.
and be strategic about how you move through that culture. One of my favorite sayings, and I didn't know I had been saying this so long until I heard my daughter, who was participating in the panel, say, "I will not participate in my own disrespect."
Mm.
And and that's something that I've just always said. When I know that you're disrespecting me, I'm not going to go along to get along. And I think that there are ways that you can communicate that message and not be a part of what's going on. It's one of my favorite examples is remember when Kamala Harris said, "I'm speaking."
Mhm.
So she stopped them in their tracks and said, "I'm speaking. You listen. It's my turn now." And I think that it's appropriate at times to call people on what they're doing um, in a manner that is professional
Mhm.
but firm. And that certainly happened to me. I've seen it happen to other people in the workplace. And what I try to always do is to be an ally. And so there are times at meetings when I hear young Black women speaking, and someone else will start talking, and I'll say, "Excuse me, but let's go back to what Dr. Williams was saying before she was interrupted."
Mhm.
And so I don't think it makes any sense to be the only one. I think that when you get in, if you are the only one, then it's incumbent upon us to push that door open and to help other people enter and to then help them navigate once they're there. And so when you are aware of a situation that is problematic, I think we have to be our own advocates. I think we have to be advocates for other women, especially other women of color who want to stay in that workplace because quite often change is made from within.
Mhm. Okay.
So I would add to that, following up on what Dr. Johnson Bailey said with regard to needing to know the culture. And understanding, for example, in the academy and higher education, it was not um, designed for people of color, for Blacks, for Black women. And so recognizing that it's really not necessarily us that is um, needing, is the, as you will, we always get labeled as the problem. So it's
Mhm.
understanding that the problem does not lie with us or within us, that it really is a systemic kind of problem. So I think recognizing that in terms of can be very helpful with strategies, important strategies, recognizing that we are resilient,
Mhm.
uh, that we are resilient, and our history is one of resiliency and perseverance, and so not to let go of that when we are in these spaces, the academy, in other professional spaces. More and more, I'm realizing the importance of self-care, um, and our own well-being, that sometimes we give and give and want to fit in to a system that was not designed for us, that really in some instances would want to keep us out. That we have to take care of ourselves and then be very discerning about who we have as allies, how we go about fighting the battles. It's every battle worth fighting for. There may be other ways to fight battles. So all of those things I think we need to take into consideration as
All right.
well.
So, and I feel like, if for those who are totally unaware, because I was looking for this answer, not knowing that pet to threat phenomenon was actually the answer. Um, and so, for those ladies who are actually going through this actual phenomenon, I mean, that's a long, ugly road. It's ugly and it's painful. what Dr. Nikki said, hey, this has been a pain. It's extremely painful. And so if you don't even know that it's, that this phenomenon exists, you're just like, oh my God, just spinning, running, just running into a brick wall, or so it seems. And then, like, to me, in my view, it's what level of self-care can you do? Because if you depend on that job, if you depend on that workplace, it's what self-care can you do? Is there anything that you can hold on to in the interim for those who are unaware of it, or what other type of I think once someone knows, hey, what you're experiencing is an actual phenomenon, that kind of takes the pressure off. It lets the steam out. You're like, oh, okay, I can label it. I think, like Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw says, you can't fix it if you can't name it. Words to that effect. Don't get me on the quote. But once you're able to actually say, oh, that's what this is, it kind of takes you to a different dimension, but it still doesn't give you the roadmap on how to resolve the issue, which is one of the reasons why I asked that question. Do the people who are executing this phenomenon, do they know? Is it intentional? Any of you ladies on the panel, do you think if someone went to them and said, hey, you know what, I just learned about this pet to threat phenomenon, this is what you're doing, don't you? You guys think that's a good idea? That's why you guys respond to that, please.
I definitely do not think that's a good idea. And I would say, if you have a manager or supervisor who seems to be like pushing you into that pet corner, I think, I agree. It's not always intentional. It could be. But I think there are a lot of well-meaning individuals who engage in what psychologist Susan Fisk calls a more benevolent prejudice. And so they may actually believe that they are doing you a favor by not providing you stretch opportunities, by putting you on the DEI committee and kind of directing that type of work to you when you might not even have an interest in it. Right. But again, the overexposure, being profiled and celebrated, even if it's for the wrong things, can feel good. I think it's our responsibility to, as much as we are able, to kind of communicate clearly about what our expectations are in building our careers, to question and, when we can, set some boundaries around the work that we're engaging in. It's like, well, I thought I was hired to do X, but you keep asking me to do Y. How is that going to enable me to move on to the next position or to ever get promoted? And we have to continue to invest in ourselves, even when, we get a job that satisfies our, financial needs. We still have to be willing to find ways to engage in education and professional development in order to avoid these circumstances. But I think, again, I'll go back to the, keeping the door open for new opportunities, but also going back to Dr. Phelps, I would add in the self-care toolkit, having community. I think too often we suffer in silence, and we think that whatever we're going through, we're the only one. But, if we can learn to trust each other a little bit more and demonstrate some vulnerability, even if strategically, we might, understand that, oh, wait, no, we're not the only one doing this. And maybe that, I can learn how someone else has navigated it in the past.
Mm-hmm. Shout out to April Showers Network. Thanks for pulling up, April. We appreciate you. So Dr. Nikki has put in here in the chat, how does one present this to HR in ways that can invoke change and support? And an additional question I have for either of you ladies, is there like a collateral damage, any fallout from this pet to threat phenomenon, like other than the dynamic between the pet and and the, and the supporting team. What about, and if has your research even addressed any of this? How does that impact the team or the group? Do you guys have any findings on that? Is there, were you able to determine if, how the co-workers around that pet feel? Like, are they able to see this phenomenon in play from either the pet stage or the now you're finally a threat, you're not being treated like you were when you were the pet? Did you guys find or learn anything about that while you were doing your research?
Well, our research doesn't extend to that area at this time.
Sure.
But, let me just remind you that this is the American workplace that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And it has not been my experience in my 50 years of working in an American workplace that people are concerned with the well-being of one specific group.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about people of color and women and Black women. That is just not been a concern.
Right.
To look at the group holistically and want to know how they're doing, how they're thriving. That's a very rare phenomenon. I'm sure it exists somewhere, but I've not seen it in any of the workplaces. And let me just say, I'm speaking from my first experience in the American workplace when I actually worked for EEOC, and when I went to the field and investigated some things. People are oblivious to what is happening to one particular group.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not of concern. That's not the American workplace that I know. And please, Dr. Thomas and Dr. Phelps, join in and address this. But I've never seen anyone be overly concerned to what's happening to the women in the workplace. Are they thriving? Are they succeeding? Even when they have stats that show them that the pipeline is leaking, they wonder. They may look at specific instances, but they don't to look at the group as a whole and to make some sort of analysis would then put the onus on them and the workplace and for them to see what part they play in the problem. And I've just never seen anyone be that concerned with that.
And truly own it and then look to make it better. Well, back to Dr. Nikki's question, how does one present this situation to HR and as she states, in ways that can invoke change and support? Do you guys have any recommendations on that? And then to follow up on her question, she says, what would professional development look like that addresses this phenomenon? If you ladies have an idea on what that should look like.
Yeah, I would say I've had a different experience than what Dr. Johnson Bailey described. So when I was still at Georgia, I would, periodically talk about my research to the Atlanta Diversity Manager Association, which is, all the chief diversity officers in the Atlanta corporate community. And I remember after maybe my second talk, VP from one of the large Atlanta utility companies came up to me and said, I heard you talk about your work on diversity resistance in the past, and I think, my organization would like to fund your lab. And as we got, into the conversation over a matter of weeks, what I learned is that he knew that, he had a leaky pipeline of Black high potential women leaving that organization. They were easily poached. And as he, said to me, no one mentored them. White women don't seem to be interested in them, and the Black men above them are kind of hands off. So they are very much kind of left alone, and we're trying to retain them, but it feels almost impossible. So I think, in an era where DEI was a stated value of many organizations, and they're competing with one another for being on these top 10 lists and getting recognitions, which, in my literature can demonstrate some financial return on investment. There was a tracking of these sorts of metrics. But I think as there's more and more challenges, we're going to see, interest in tracking and trying to understand that data lessen. And as to the second question, the professional development is not to resolve, being treated as a pet or being treated as a threat. It's to give yourself opportunities to move on to the next thing, right? And not just be content with, the skill set that you've developed, where you are, but to just give yourself an opportunity for more mobility.
Right. Yeah, it does kind of sound like, I wonder if someone else, maybe if someone else were able to pick up this mantle and start going in different directions. And I don't know let me put it like this. If it were me and I picked up this mantle, I would be more like, hey, this is what you guys are doing. Let's fix it. This isn't right. That's not the right attitude. I'm sure it's not what you ladies would do. So, but I think the best thing about this is to recognize that it exists, recognize exactly what it is. And it seems to me, and ladies, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me like if you've identified this as a quandary that you're in, that one needs to go ahead and start looking for something else in order to maintain their peace. Because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of room to actually, and I could be wrong, and that's why I'm glad you ladies are here. It doesn't seem like there's room to actually lay it out and try to get around it, or it's hard to make people see. So, would you guys agree with that, or do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think I'm processing the question, and I don't know. For some, the answer may be to leave. To say, "Wow, this is too much for me. Not what I want to deal with," and move on.
Mm-hmm.
I think all three of us, though, having been in an academic higher ed setting for me, 34 years. I still manage to recognize the issue and still move forward within the organization. Identifying what's happening, I think that as Dr. Thomas mentioned, communicating and not staying in our silos. We're so good sometimes, and that superwoman identity comes out, and that serves us very well at times. And then there are times when we do need to be more vulnerable to the right individuals and the appropriate communities. Recognizing, again, I keep going back to our strengths that we have had. One of my main reasons, I think, for getting into academia and continuing to stay in it was wanting to be a part of future generations. So generations being trained and nurtured to pick up the mantle. And so that's one of the things I think that keeps me going. Is kind of recognizing that and paving the way for others.
There was a time when I called EEOC and I said, hey, and I use this term microaggressions. And
Real.
the guy on the phone was like, huh? What is that? And so we know what that is. We know.
We do.
We know what that is. And then this person, whether he knew what microaggressions are or not, feigned ignorance, and that was the end of the discussion. And so my concern, especially in this climate, this, 2024, 2025, is you guys, I've heard you say, the communicating. With whom should the people enduring this pet to threat phenomena, with whom should they communicate in order, and who should they communicate with in order to relieve the stress and seek resolution? Because it's seeming like, and again, just the fact that it can be identified is enough for me, but it seems like that might be all we're able to do until additional research is done on, yeah.
Well, see, I don't think it's a phenomenon that we have recognized.
Okay.
I know that I live in a constant state of being perceived as a threat because I've risen through the ranks. I've gone from assistant to associate to professor to now holding 3 professorships. I know how I'm seen and how I'm viewed as a threat. That cognizance gives me an understanding of how then I need to navigate the workplace. It is not a point of discomfort. It's just a point of being. And so I don't look for anyone, in my earlier years, I can remember wanting someone to sort of fix it or solve it or make me feel better. I don't do that anymore. I go back to what Dr. Phelps said about self-care. There are many ways that I take care of myself, whether it's my massages every 2 weeks, but more importantly, it's having a network outside of academia, having a network within academia, women that I know from other universities that I see once or twice a year at different conferences so that we can physically talk and have time to get away. But then I have conversations with them, through text, through email, through picking up the phone to say, okay, Vanessa, am I crazy or did this really happen?
Right.
So I have a network of
Yes.
Black women across the U.S. that support me. I have Dr. Phelps, I have Dr. Thomas that I can call and start the conversation with the familiar phrase, "Can you believe this?"
Well,
And we go on from there.
yes.
And so it's a phenomenon that when recognized, then you understand what you have to deal with and what you're confronted with.
Wow.
But asking someone to solve or to fix the situation, that hasn't been something that I have been able to do. And I can offer testimonial to what Dr. Thomas said. She has had wonderful mentors in her workplace who recognized her, who saw her, who identified with what she was studying and wanted to make a difference. I haven't been that fortunate.
Right. You know what? Go ahead, Dr. Phelps. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I think an extension of that, and this may go back to some of your EEOC
Conversation.
example and conversation, but particularly in the academy, people recognize research and data, and for example, there has been in the academy this idea of Black instructors, Black women instructors, their evaluations are just, what are they teaching in the classroom? They don't seem to get very good evaluations. Well, there has been an abundance of literature that kind of talks about how Black instructors get much lower course ratings than do white instructors, but that has nothing to do. It has more to do with who's doing the evaluations than the expertise of the instructor. And so one of the ways I think we can help deal with some of this is kind of the educative nature to our colleagues and allies. And that truly can be burdensome to us because we are always educating folks about our experiences and who we are and what we do and how it's perceived differently. So again, I think that's where some of the self-care comes in thinking about being strategic into whom you share that, who will serve as allies and bringing that to one's attention, who are the people that you will look to and share that information with that can make a difference.
Yes, yes. You know, what I appreciate about all three of your responses is that all three of them are different, which is great because, and I'm going to say, Dr. Bailey, more than likely, I'm probably going to, I think I respond to yours. Like, will you believe this? Um, and I appreciate what you ladies have said because again, that's that additional coping mechanism in order to, once we've identified this and there's not really, because there really isn't. I mean, I asked you guys like, hey, should we go to the person who's doing this phenomenon and say, hey, look what you're doing? Of course not. Because, they're going to play the role. But just for us to stay sane and stay not allowing them to win at trying to diminish and minimize our greatness. And so, yeah, these different approaches are just so important, especially for the variety of individuals who, as Black women, we're just completely diverse. An additional question I had, though, and we're going to, I don't know if anyone in the Twitter space has a question. If so, please come on the stage because we're probably going to wrap shortly. But one of the additional questions I had, when you guys were doing this research, or when the research was being conducted and you guys were making it happen, what did you, because I know I've written the articles I've read as women of color, people of color, was that broken down and delineated or stratified as far as like specific to Black women, Latino women, or are we just looking at just people who are not white identifying?
I don't, I would say statistically, we did not have the power to really break into these subgroups.
Mm-hmm.
I think the original sample was female, but you saw people expressing pet experiences and threat experiences across racial groups, across disciplines, across different types of institutions, even across roles, faculty and staff. So, for me, if we were to continue to engage in this work, I would be interested in the extent to which this is kind of a numbers game, an issue of like numeric representation, or is it an issue of power? Mm-hmm. Those with the least level of power are most vulnerable to being treated as a threat, having these barriers to their, career mobility. And then perhaps once they, jump every hurdle, exceed every goal, then having the experience of threatening the status quo. So I think that's kind of an empirical question for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Let me say, I've sat back and marveled at the times that I've seen sort of pet to threat used in the press. I saw someone use it in reference to the president of Harvard resigning. And I thought, oh my, okay, that. And so I've just seen this resonate across the academic workplace, across the just American workplace, period. And so I'd really be interested in looking at a study of high-powered Black women executives, mm-hmm. and how this has resonated in their work lives. And so one of the things that I've talked to Dr. Thomas and Dr. Phelps about is doing an edited volume where we collect the stories of women from across the American workplace to see how they identify this phenomenon in their individual careers.
I like, yes, I agree. I would love to see, I mean, I'd love to see some additional, well, let me put it like this, because I don't want to sound critical. I'd like to help find that do that additional research, just to help to add to the findings, because to me it generates so many questions like, okay, what should I do, how should I, just all overall. Dr. Nikki has stated in the comments that this discussion has given me language to use as a better analogy for an uncomfortable experience. It's been my experience that people regulate many concerns surrounding gaslighting and microaggressions as a you problem, not one that is systemic. What are your panel? What are your thoughts on Dr. Nikki's statement?
Do you want me to just say amen to that?
Well, hey,
I think that, before there's a name to it, I saw it again and again and again anecdotally. And even as I read research, I would see it, and it was just identified as a thing, that women were experiencing pushback, that they were experiencing resistance as they went up the career ladder. And now there's a name for it.
yes.
So I think that is part of the issue, that it has been there, but there wasn't a name for it because it hadn't been identified as this phenomenon.
Absolutely.
And then once it became identified, I think it became our issue or our problem, if you will, when really and truly it is a systemic problem.
Yes.
And a historical one.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I feel like we've talked a lot about the pet experience, but if I recall thinking about our data of the more senior women who express being treated as a threat, and again, that looked like not having the same rewards and recognition as their peers, being perhaps lacking voice even as leaders, but they also talked about having an erosion of support from prior mentors, from family members who didn't understand their ambition. And when I've looked at responses to articles, about Pet to Threat posted on Twitter and LinkedIn, one of the things that really struck me was just how grieved some of these women have been when their mentoring relationships eroded,
Right.
where they reached a certain level of accomplishment, and then the senior women who were happy to kind of mentor them now seem to kind of distance themselves from them. And sometimes this was between two Black women or women of color. So I think that's definitely kind of another area we could build kind of into
Yes.
a future project.
Yeah, because, especially, as this knowledge of this pet to threat phenomenon gains awareness, there's, and I think that's the part I was trying to drive at was, people that are doing this, executing this phenomenon, knowing exactly what they're doing. And, that's where, to me, it would seem that you could have a direct conversation. Hey, Susie, I know you were reading that article on Pet to Threat, and that's exactly what I've been saying to you for the past 8 years, Susie. Now let's talk about it. And I know, you ladies, you won't say it like that, but, so now you've got two parties that are aware of this phenomenon, and there's no denying they're aware of it, but yet it still continues to thrive in the workplace. That's where I'm like, and I like what Dr. Johnson Bailey said about I go get that massage every 2 weeks. I'm calling my network. Hey, this again, which is definitely a stress reliever. But sometimes, I want to deal with a new form of stress. And I'm tired of Susie winning all the time. Like, stop giving me the blues, Susie. So yeah, I think additional research would be, in that area. That would be. I just think I would just like to know more about, how we can be able to actually bring this up. I think, like Dr. Walden is saying, like, how can we take it to HR and not and them not say, huh?
But you will recall that I said I don't participate in my own disrespect.
I know
So
that's right. Ooh,
I will call people on what they're doing, and
right.
I will name it. It's just that in terms of then wanting HR to solve it, that has just been not a route that I have taken in academia.
Right. So, if you don't mind me asking, and if it's too, it's like, hey, look, Mel, I didn't sign up for this. So, when you have called people on it, like, what have been some of the responses, or is it not the pet to threat, just the action? That's something specific per se that you call them out on.
Well, I remember an incident where a colleague was, in a sense, taking some of my work and then wanting to get a book contract with it. And I remember asking a mentor for help in this situation. And he said to me, Juanita, you have enough. Can't you let this other person have this? Which meant giving my academic work away to someone. And my response was no. And so I just nicely found a way to talk to him about it. And then to say, if a book proposal is going to be done on this, I'm going to do it. And I, in fact, then went and did that book proposal. Um, and it was at a time before I was ready to do it, but it meant either claiming my work or letting someone else claim it. And
Right.
so even though I was told to stay in my place, I let them know that my place was alongside my work.
Come on.
Yeah. Well, and Melanie, you recall when we first started having this conversation, about this podcast,
Sure.
I said, it was going to be really important that you include the trademark, which should be after threat, by the way.
Okay. Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, because we were seeing so many people, and it's not that they were laying claim to our work,
Sure.
but they were, talking about it and I think misrepresenting it. We
Mm,
saw some commercial, um, workshops, retreat, webinars
wow.
without any connection to us, no reference to our work, no citation to the chapter. And, so we're, taking a legal route to protect our intellectual property by
Sure.
getting this trademark.
Right. Absolutely. Well, for starters, I'm going to fix this. And so when we get done, I'm going to change that graphic up, and we'll make sure that that's done correctly because I respect what you ladies have done here. This is some awesome research. Just the mere fact, again, of being able to put a name on it. That is, I mean, my goodness, that takes, now it's, at least it gets the steam out of your head and you can just say, "Whew, okay, now let me go to the next phase." Yeah, Dr. Walton saying I have had people remove my name completely from the entire document prior to publication. Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah. It's not, just not a surprise at all. Um, I will say, ladies, um, I think I've got all my questions. You guys have been great. I appreciate I appreciate the diversity in responses because I think the type and style of woman that you all are individually. There are other women that are going to resonate with that specific personality trait that you guys have, and that in and of itself is going to provide some level of peace and tranquility and the ability to get up and fight another day. So thank you, ladies. Thank you so much for spending this bit of time with me this evening.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
It
All
was
right. Oh, yes, the pleasure was all mine. So that's it. That is the podcast. Be sure to like, share, subscribe. If you haven't already, Replay Gang, leave a comment. You know I want to hear from you. And until next time, y'all, we will see ya when we see ya. Thanks again.